the states with, as you may know, California is one of the states with the least transparent and the least accountable policing in the nation. The police and correctional unions are immensely powerful in getting laws passed that protect the police too often at the expense of protecting the public, where unions have demanded and gotten the final say on many policies that protect their interests, not the public's. Politicians, from city councils to state legislatures to legislators to members of Congress, do accept monies from organized policing and give them special attention. For example, police unions and associations in California gave $5.5 million to state legislative candidates between 2011 and 2018, 200 times more than the National Rifle Association did. So politicians are also usually afraid to confront or resist police for fear they'll be targeted as soft on crime and then vulnerable to attacks and election violence. So really, it's up to us, the citizen, to say that we demand transparency and accountability from our police. It's our taxes that pay police salaries and the exceptional health and pension benefits that they receive, much of which now are driving California cities and cutting other services to its taxpayers, i.e. us. So let's now hear what this bill will do, why it's so badly needed, and what we can do to get this on the books. And let me introduce our speakers tonight. To my left, Cheryl Dorsey, retired Los Angeles Police Department sergeant, a member of the police force for 20 years, 1980, right, to 2000, and on patrol for all your time, I gather, right? Yes. Okay, great. And she's been on television programs speaking before public groups, and I've heard she's great. Okay, speak up. Great. The other person on my right is Jennifer Rojas, who is Community Engagement and Advocacy Officer of ACLU Southern California. And I believe you helped to organize the lobbying day in Sacramento, didn't you, a couple of weeks ago, where...
Just yesterday.
Just yesterday. Oh, okay. So I'd like to start with you, and would you tell us what you think about this, what this is all about, and how we can make a difference, because it is up to us and for jail, because we don't have sentences.
Sure. So hi everyone, thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for your patience as I walked in a little late here. So I guess I can talk a little bit about the bill first, like what it will do. So AB 32, it's a bill that's brand new in the legislature this year. It's authored by Assemblymember Weber from San Diego, and it's going to do three main things. Number one, it's going to make sure that officers can only shoot and use deadly force when they have no other alternatives available to them. And we think that that's kind of common sense. We think that that's already the case, but it's not. Officers now can use deadly force whenever they deem it objectively reasonable. And so that's the standard that has to change. So AB 392 does two other significant things. Number two, it makes sure, it mandates that officers use de-escalation tactics whenever feasible. And three, it's going to hold officers accountable when they use deadly force that is either unnecessary or they created the circumstances that led to deadly force. So that's the bill. This bill is really going to create the very clear standards that is going to intervene in California's high rate of deadly force. California has, out of all other states, we think California is progressive, but when it comes to policing, and thanks to this introduction, due to the power of the police lobby in our state, we are not up to par when it comes to the rest of the country. And that, California has not only the highest numbers of deadly force, but also the highest rates. And so, just to give an example, California is home to 5 of the 15 largest and most deadly police departments in the nation. And so that includes departments like Bakersfield and Kern County Sheriffs, San Bernardino, Santa Ana, Stockton. And so, I think this is a very strong standard. This is, this bill is ACLU's #1 priority this year. It's the only priority this year, and it's for a good reason. And, we know that this bill is going to save lives from police violence. We know this because the data is behind it. This is not a piece of legislation that, ACLU and other advocates sort of pulled from the sky. These are standards that are proven to work in places like Seattle, Cleveland. These are standards that the Obama's Department of Justice had implemented in every single consent decree that they implemented in their tenure. So this is a bill that we know will work. But that said, to your introduction, we are up against a really big hurdle, and that is the power of the police union. If we look at the piece of legislation that was passed last year that increased police transparency. This police transparency bill was 1421. It finally passed last year, but it took years of effort. And SB 1421, so that bill makes now police misconduct records available to the public. And so if an officer engages in deadly force, engages in sexual misconduct, or serious misconduct like perjury or lying, then now those records are available to the public. Any member of the public can now submit a PRA request to their city to request that information. And so that was a huge win for impacted family members who had lost a loved one to police who never knew what happened to their loved one. Unfortunately now, and I think thankfully now, they can now understand and know how the police interpreted what happened to their loved one. I suggest this bill to say that it took so much work on behalf of people on the ground, grassroots community members, community members in districts like this, to really amp up the pressure on our legislators. Because, to your point, so many legislators receive funding from statewide and local police lobbyists and associations. And so really that moneyed interest is preventing our state legislature from adopting common sense standards. Again, the standards that the data shows that will work. There's a lot of misconceptions that the police associations are putting out about this bill. And so, forums like these are so important to actually talk about the data and what this bill will do. So thank you so much for the invitation and for everyone's patience and letting me speak today.
You want to go on and give us a little more? I'm going to give you 20 minutes now. Are there other things you want to speak to about the bill and about the effort?
Sure. So I can tell you now, I guess what would be really helpful, perhaps when we talk about what folks can do. So, forums like these are super important because part of the purpose is not only education, but also to get folks and plug them in where they see themselves. And so it's going to be really important for folks to take action today and hopefully in the next couple days to really pass this bill. And one thing I failed to mention is where we are in the bill timeline. And I will say, as early as next week is going to be a very critical point in the bill in which it needs to pass probably the toughest hurdle, and that is the assembly floor. And so if and when it does pass the assembly floor, it'll then have to go to the Senate and then to the governor. But right now we're up against the first and likely largest hurdle for us. And again, that's going to be as soon as next week. And so there's a number of local legislators in Los Angeles who really need to be hearing from constituents. And so I'm assuming that a lot of folks here are from Pasadena, but for folks who are also not, it's really important. I'm really appreciative that I'm here today talking to you all because, Pasadena, the local assembly member, is in support of this bill. He's actually a co-author. However, there's a lot of legislators in Los Angeles, which I could name, that would be really important for folks to give a call to. And so some of those folks include Assemblymember Calderon, folks from like Whittier, La Mirada, La Habra Heights, Assemblymember Nazarian, Assemblymember Gabriel, and Assemblymember Blue, and I can actually recount those districts for folks who are here. I think one more thing that I'll say at this point is ACLU does have a toll-free hotline that anyone can call at any moment that will direct you directly to your assembly member or your senator. And all you have to do is enter in your area code into this number. So I can tell you all that now. And you'll give me one moment. So that number, if folks want to write this down, and actually, if folks want to, make a note in your cell phone now and make a call tonight or tomorrow morning, I will say a lot of legislative offices at this point will be closed. However, you can leave a message. And the impact of this is that every single legislator in their office is going to count how many calls that they receive from constituents. And so for everyone to make a call is going to make a huge impact. Like for everyone in this room, if we got one call, that's a big impact on every single legislator.
And these senators as well as assemblymen, or just the assembly?
At this point, well, the number can route you to your assembly member or your senator, but at this point, we're really trying to make sure that we pass the assembly. And so you can opt to call your assembly member through this hotline. It's very easy. It's very streamlined. That number is 855. Yes. 644. 2258. Again, so that's a toll-free hotline, and I'm happy to repeat it. And so this is the gist of and the importance of the bill. I mean, again, we know that this bill is going to save lives. There have been too many families who've been shattered by police violence. Unfortunately, we hear about these incidents every single day. In Anaheim, where I work, there was just an incident, last year in which the district attorney recently justified the shooting. However, the chief happened to fire the main officer. And so I think it's so rare for those circumstances. I mean, even to have a chief fire a problematic officer, an officer who, in many cases, deadly force, there are many repeat shooters in multiple departments. And so to have a chief finally take action to fire a problematic officer is a big step forward. And I think part of the utility of this bill is making sure that not only chiefs, but our state legislature, our courts, and our penal code is held to a higher standard, so that officers, really can only shoot when absolutely necessary. Every single case where we don't see that is a life unjustly taken. Suddenly and tragically, it's a family that can no longer, we just passed Mother's Day. There's too many families who weren't able to celebrate Mother's Day with their, with their son, with their brother, in some cases with their mom. This bill is about changing that. So I'm happy to talk more about actions, including the postcards, but...
Well, let me ask you a question. I understand that not only does it restrict police from using deadly force when not necessary, it also restricts them in doing great bodily harm to people. And I don't know whether you're familiar with the Kris Olkershauser case, which happened here. I don't know whether it's circulated in ACLU, but for those of us who live here in Pasadena and Altadena, this was a young black man in November of 2017 who was driving, I believe it's his parents' SUV to fill up some gas, and a gang unit from Pasadena, he was in Altadena, going to an Altadena gas station. The PPD car from Pasadena was in Altadena looking for gang members, and decided that he had no front license and he had tinted windows, so they turned their car around and came in right behind him on the gas Pasadena Police Department, of course, the same, was within policy, and they are defending the two officers. We had found out since that the two officers were transfers. One was from Bakersfield, the department that you were referencing. But this is what the attorney recently said, that he found out about these two officers as far as the lateral transfer hired from LA County Sheriff's Department and the Bakersfield.
Louder, please.
Louder. Okay, all right. The two officers, Lujan and Esparza, are lateral transfer hires from LA County Sheriff's Department and the Bakersfield Police Department, respectively, hired by the city of Pasadena, despite repeated problems of, quote, maintaining internal cultures that sanction misconduct, including excessive force, false arrests, and frame-ups, and fabricated police reports, especially directed against African Americans, according to John Burton, who's the attorney. And Burton went on to say they didn't need sensitivity training, they needed discipline. And that's, again, what this bill will do, and that's what would have happened to the officers had this been in effect when they took out after Chris Blue. They're still on the force, they're not in the field, but they certainly have not been fired.
Yeah, I mean, that's an incredibly important point. Like, to your point, this bill would mandate de-escalation whenever mandatory and whenever feasible. And, you know, at this point in time, that's not the case. That's not state law, that's not policy. I think it's rare for even policies of any of the 200 plus police and sheriff's departments agencies that we have in California. It's rare for policies to even mention de-escalation. That's a big problem. And so I think part of the utility of this bill is having clear standards for when de-escalation happens and make sure that officers de-escalate whenever possible. And so that would then be the standard in which chiefs have to hold their officers accountable. And so I think the other important thing to note about this bill is that the data also shows that these standards that would be put forth under AB 392 would be both safer for the public and for police officers themselves. Because when officers are forced to de-escalate whenever possible, they slow things down. They create situations that are safer for both themselves and for members of the public. And so, you know, in Seattle, for example, this policy where officers could only shoot when absolutely necessary, use deadly force whenever absolutely necessary, that policy was implemented in 2013. In 2015, the United States Federal Monitor released a report on what were the findings and outcomes of this policy change. They found that not only were officers less likely to engage in deadly force, but also there was no impact on public safety. There was no change in how officers, you know, there was no increase or change in the impact on officers. And so this policy, the increased standard to make sure that officers only use deadly force when necessary, including mandating de-escalation whenever possible, that's going to create the policy that we know is going to have some real changes in California. And I think this state would really be the place where we have to implement this.
Okay, thank you. Cheryl, let's turn to you and just ask the obvious question from your experience as an LAPD patrol officer for 20 years. Why do you think we need AB 392?
So let me say this. I've been a police officer for 20 years on LAPD, and during that 20 years I spent it all in patrol, and I worked in every bureau within the city of Los Angeles. LA is divided into 4 bureaus. Central Bureau, which is basically downtown area. West Bureau, which is West LA, Venice Beach area. South Bureau, which is referred to sometimes as South Central Los Angeles, and Valley Bureau, which is San Fernando Valley. I worked in all of those bureaus during my 20 years, and I did it at a time when there was a lot of stuff going on in LA. I started, proudly to say, under Harold Francis Gates. And so, you know, that name means something in certain circles. And I also worked the infamous gang detail known as CRASH, Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is not anything somebody told me. I haven't read it on a piece of paper. I'm going to be telling you what I lived, and I'm going to be telling you what I know. And more importantly, I'm going to be telling you that I did it as a female. Because what I hear from police chiefs, and particularly the president of the California Police Chiefs Association, who is pushing back mightily against this bill, is that somehow if this bill were to pass, that, you know, police officers, they said in Sacramento a couple of weeks ago when I was up there, that you're asking police officers to be superhuman. If you were to have to adhere to this bill, you'd have to have superhuman strength and capabilities, and it's unfair and unreasonable to expect officers to go through a checklist before they engage with the citizen. But listen, everybody who came here had to go through a checklist. When you got in your car, you had to figure out, you know, when to put your seatbelt on, were you going to wear your shoes, or you going to put on your driving shoes? That's what I had to do, right? When you get to a red light, do you stop or do you go through? So, I mean, everything we do requires us to make quick decisions, right? Every position that you are holding requires you to make snap judgment decisions. If you're a pilot, you got to figure it out pretty quick. If you're a chef in a restaurant, you got to know what the heck you're doing. You got to know the difference between a knife and a doggone fork, right? So is it unreasonable to expect a police officer should know the difference between a taser and a gun, or that they should stop and freeze frame like we're taught to do? Because most of what I see as a supervisor, and I have been required to evaluate uses of force, is that very seldom is there an exigent circumstance in terms of what we do. Very seldom. Even when SWAT comes out, and those are high-powered calls, they take their time. They talk to people. They get schematics of the room that the guy may be in, and create an opportunity to have a crisis negotiator talk with them. They're never in any hurry. And that's what I was always taught, is that there's never any hurry, right? And so if you look at the things that are occurring, and just recently in the last 24 hours, there was a woman in Houston who was mentally ill, it's reported. And the officer knew her. He knew her. There was a relationship, because oftentimes we know the people that we deal with. You live here, I work here. I see you every day. So if I don't get you today, I'm not personally invested, I'll get you tomorrow, right? They knew who this woman was. She had a warrant, whatever that means. I don't know if it was a traffic ticket that went to warrant, if it was a arrest warrant, if she's a bad actor, I don't know, because they're using what I call double speak, company speak, to define what this interaction was about. But nonetheless, you have one officer and one female. I was taught we never want the numbers to be even. So what that officer should have done was just back up. Call for backup. What was the urgency in getting this lady into custody? What was the urgency in the case of Stephon Clark when officers chased him into his grandmother's backyard and had the benefit of concealment and cover with an air unit overhead illuminating the backyard? They could have easily freeze frame, like we were taught to do, get on your radio and direct units, set up a perimeter. He's running this way, that way. I need a unit here, I need a unit there. We snap decision. This is what we do. This is my training. I don't think about it. I just do it because it's my training. And so when officers do that, then you don't have a reason to shoot 20 times at somebody because you think they had a cell phone. And really, you know, you ought to know whether or not it's a cell phone. On LAPD, we practice shoot, don't shoot scenarios so that you know what it is that you're shooting at. This bill will give officers pause. This is not the end-all and the be-all, but it's certainly a good first step. Because I believe the next step then is going to be accountability. Officers need to be held accountable when they violate that policy and that procedure. And so I'm speaking from a position of, because what Ronald A. Lawrence, the president of the California Police Chiefs Association, likes to say is that this is unreasonable. And many of you who've never done the job can't imagine what it's like to have to make those decisions in a moment. And so I do, I know, because I had to do that. And I chased people who ran from me. I dealt with bad guys who were non-compliant and uncooperative and profane, and guess what? I didn't get to shoot them. I did this job for 20 years and shot no one. And it's not because I didn't. It's not because I didn't deal with bad guys, because I did, but also I had to use a little common sense, and right? If sense were common, everybody would have it, right? And so I don't know why police chiefs are unwilling to admit and acknowledge that there are some people on police departments who shouldn't be there. Not everybody who wants wants to be in the police should be. And there's no harm in admitting that. And so unless and until police chiefs are willing to admit and acknowledge that and do something to get these people who have the improper temperament to do the job off the job, we're going to continue to have these kinds of incidences. It's unreasonable, it's disingenuous, it's offensive to me as a mother and as a police supervisor to be told that an officer should shoot somebody, could shoot somebody, would shoot somebody because they can't catch them. Because they won't come here, because they won't turn around when they tell them to do. I created a phrase that I like to use, and I say it's contempt of cop. And for me, contempt of cop means piss me off, there's a price to pay. Piss me off. And I get to decide what that price is. And we see officers punishing people when they don't comply. We see officers punishing people when they don't come here. We see officers punishing people when they run and they catch them. And that's not what we're taught to do. So if officers are not able to rely on their training, if they aren't confident in the skill set that they've been presented with, then this is not the job for you, and that's okay. That's okay. And so I just speak in a real way about the things that I know, because Chief Ronald A. Lawrence can't say to me what he might say to you about not knowing because you've not done the job. I did. And I'm not superhuman. I don't know. I'm just a girl, right? I'm just a girl. It doesn't require anything extra special other than just common sense, the ability to relate, I think, to people. I think when officers, and something about men, you know, testosterone, and they get personally invested, and when somebody doesn't do what you say, you want to, you know, I'm going to fix you, I'm going to show you, and, you know, women, we deal with things differently, because when I come on the job, I come on knowing I already have a disadvantage because I'm a female and because I have limitations, and so I've got to use some common sense, my femininity, if that's what I have to apply. And then when all of that fails, because now I've done those things, I've kind of tried to relate to you, I've de-escalated, and none of that worked, well then now we'll go ahead and if physicality is what you want, then I'm here to give people what they want. But I don't do that first, and I don't have to do that first. And so to say that asking an officer to think, to rely on their training is somehow burdensome, I think is problematic. And so that's why I speak out the way that I do here and other places about what it is that I think police officers should be doing. And so AB 392 is certainly a great first step that will cause officers, hopefully, to give pause before they use force or deadly force. And to the story you were talking about with the Pasadena officers, the other thing that causes me concern are officers who move around. Police officers don't move around like NBA stars. You know, you got an officer that's going from department to department, that's a red flag for me. Most police officers get on an agency, hunker down, and just work towards that pension. And what we see is that if we look, that generally they are problematic. And they are leaving because they've been given that gift of resignation, right? They get that gift of resignation and they get to move on to another police department and continue to do more bad acts because there's no paper trail. And so part of what you can do as a community is if and when you become aware of police misconduct is create a paper trail. Contact your police chief, contact your mayor, because every police chief serves at the pleasure of a mayor. If you have an independent review board, contact them. Write a letter because what I know is that police departments don't like paper. And when you give them paper, you put it on somebody's plate, I promise you they will get it off. And what you do is you CC everybody that you contact so that everybody knows who got that letter. And I promise you the next day they'll be on the phone saying, I got this letter and your name is on it, did you get it? If you go into a police station and talk to the desk officer, you may get the guy who's right off probation or even on probation and he doesn't have the juice to really do anything and may not even send your complaint forward. So it's very important to create a paper trail and to hold officers accountable, and I think AB 392 will do that. And so that's why I'm here, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that you guys might have at the end.
Yeah, well, why don't we begin to take some questions from the audience? And I see Granny has a question already.
One favor, can you make sure to speak up because I'm not turning the camera? Just want to hear you. new LA County Sheriff.
You do already? Oh, why, you're talking about the other way, but I'm sorry.
Everybody really thought was going to change things. I doubly voted for that man because I believed him. He's bringing back officers that were put off the force, and apparently nobody can do anything about it because county supervisors, all they can do is hold up a budget, but they can't fire him. So what can we do? I mean, because now between him and the person who's in charge of this country, whose name I refuse to mention, has really brought out the really bad stuff. And these police officers, even though I like the bill, what guarantee do you have that if we do put punishment on them, it's going to be effective? I mean, I'm really concerned about that, especially as a person of color. And we don't have a person in Pasadena right now, so I don't even know who's going to be our person. So,
Absolutely. Yeah, so that's a huge problem. And I mean, just to reiterate, I mean, you're right, Pasadena-Foot has recently reinstated at least 2, if not more, sheriff's deputies who were previously fired for stalking and domestic violence because they were involved with his election campaign. And so that's a huge problem, period. And
he's closed cases that are under investigation of police officers too.
yeah, we see that a lot throughout the state, and we saw it in Santa Ana, in which, officers had been fired for raiding and stealing products from a marijuana dispensary and assaulting a disabled woman at that same time. Those officers were fired and then rehired after like 2 years. And so, part of the utility of this bill is that when we establish a statewide standard that then makes sure that every single police department has the same policy in which officers, again, can only use deadly force when absolutely necessary, that standard is going to be very clear. It's clear, cut, to the point, and so chiefs of police will still have the ultimate authority to determine what officers to hire and fire under this bill, but at the same time, this bill will still empower community members to say, hey, this officer violated this necessity standard, or violated or did not use any de-escalation tactics when they were feasible. That gives us the power to then demand to our police chiefs, to our sheriff's departments, that these are problematic officers. It gives us really the power to make sure that the chiefs are holding their force accountable. And the same goes for district attorneys. So district attorneys will have the ultimate authority to hold officers accountable. And so by creating this clear standard, it really is up to us to then enforce this standard. And it was up to us earlier this year when we were fighting the courts to protect the transparency bill. Even after we pass legislation, it doesn't mean that the culture is going to shift like that. It's still up to the community to enforce it. And so that takes everyone. But again, establishing those clear standards, that clear policy is going to leverage more power in our favor.
Let me say something before the next question with regards to being the wave and all of that foolishness that's going on. You have to be engaged and you have to be involved. And while everybody reports to somebody, I know that the Board of Supervisors, I believe, are the ones that are trying to put some pressure on him with regards to what's going on. I don't know if that dam is going to break or if he's just going to be able to ride it out until the next election. And so because he's an elected official, certainly you'll have, and those in LA County will have something to say going forward. But until then, you have to do something, because doing nothing means we just get more of this.
right.
And so silence is agreement, right? And you can't change what you tolerate. And so my suggestion would be, when there are opportunities to speak to the Board of Supervisors, go and take a friend and call and listen. What I know, and I do this all the time, and I know it probably rubs some people raw, but that's what I do. I take to Twitter, because every police department has a Twitter account. They're on Facebook, for those of you that are social media savvy, and just have a conversation right there in 160 characters with them about what it is that's going on and what you think about it. And encourage people that you know to do that, because they are really adverse to negative publicity and they do not like that paper trail. And so it's so important to create a paper trail and let your
response to what you're saying about making sure that as citizens we address the Sheriff's Department. We don't remain silent. We recently have organized a League of Women Voters committee here in Pasadena, Pasadena area, and are now talking about putting together a forum somewhat like this to address the problems that the sheriff is creating, basically, and simply to bring public attention and make sure that the new captain, for example, who's going to come in to Pasadena knows people are watching. We're not just sitting here taking whatever you're dishing out. We're going to be watching you and speaking about it, doing whatever we can.
Police or law enforcement agencies in California that do anything like drug testing for steroids or psychiatric evaluation of these officers? Because honestly, when I see these videos, all I think of is roid rage, or just there's something wrong with them. I mean, if they're that trigger happy, like you said, they're in the wrong job. I mean, this is not the job for you if your first response is to pull a gun. So, do you know of anybody who's doing any kind of drug testing or psychiatric evaluation?
I personally don't know about drug testing. I know there was a time on LAPD where, officers randomly, intermittently, and you never know who or when would be P-tested. But in terms of psychological, I don't believe that that's happening with any regularity. As best I know, when I came on LAPD, we took a psychological when we got hired, and then that was it. And so, I mean, I'm a proponent for, I just say every 2 years, sit an officer down and crack his head open and look inside. And if stuff's not working right, help him if you can, right? Every other corporation entity has an employee assistance program. I don't know why police don't think it's sexy to report that you're not in a good place. Yeah. It's not sexy and they won't do it. And I know a lot of it has to do with the fact that officers are concerned that someone will take their gun if they 5150 you or if you say the wrong thing, and so they won't self-report. If you know that they're not going to self-report, then sit them down and have a conversation, because listen, I know for a fact, based on what I saw, there were things that I was exposed to day in and day out, and some of that stuff bothered me. I saw a guy jump off a building higher than this and live. And when I saw that as a supervisor, I'm out there with my officers, and I went back to the station and told my watch commander, we need BSS to come down here and just be available, because it bothered me. And I figured it had to bother somebody else, and my lieutenant thought it was a great idea. We had BSS come down, and by the time all my officers started coming in from the field, BSS was there, and they were like, hey, Sergeant, good. All good here. All good. I still wanted to talk to BSS. I had questions, right? And I didn't see any harm in that, but officers won't. And so I think that most times, in my mind, police chiefs circle the wagon. They know who the errant officers are. They understand that civil liability follows whatever that use of force, deadly force is. They're very careful about what they say in front of a bank of cameras, right? And then whenever it happens, you guys pay the civil suit, right? The officer doesn't. The police department doesn't. So what did the officer learn? What do they do to deter that bad behavior? Nothing. So the other thing that has to happen is that I think, in addition to reevaluations, how about we get something on the books that says any police officer who's involved in unnecessary use of force in violation of AB 392 when they didn't de-escalate, how about they pay just 1% of the civil suit? That'll break the officer's back. Because every police officer lives paycheck to paycheck just like everybody else, and they like their toys and their Sea-Doos and their trucks. And, yeah, make them have to pay 1% of $6.4 million that they gave to Eric Garner's family. Or 1 point whatever million they gave to Sandra Bland's family. Have officers be required to pay a portion of that, and I promise you, this stuff will stop yesterday.
Or they can give up their pension.
Well, you're not going to be able to get that.
Yeah, just, Cheryl, I think we want to say, we're grateful that you have an inside perspective. I'm curious from the point of view of just kind of the average low-level police officer, what is the pushback to this kind of a bill? And what is the response to that pushback?
Well, I would have to say, based on the posture of the police unions, because they speak for the ground pounders, right? That's what I was, a ground pounder, patrol officer. They don't like it. Listen, no system is gonna support anything that's gonna be contrary to what it is that you've been allowed to get away with, right? Officers, some will say that, it is unreasonable to have to think before you pull a weapon. It's a burden, and it's a problem. And when you see police officers create a situation to use deadly force, which is what we see officers exacerbating a situation. Listen, if I stop you, I understand you are not happy with the service I'm about to give you. I'm clear on that. So I don't take it personal, but that's just me, right? And so it's very easy to create a situation where you don't want to show me your driver's license because you know your rights and you don't think you did anything, and I ran your plate that said that you have some tickets or something. So now we're having a conversation, right? Because you said I'm not saying something that's factual, and then I take it personal, and now you get out the car, come here, whatever, I grab you, you don't want to be grabbed, and then the next thing you know, all I have to say is, I was in fear, because I'm a girl.
Yeah.
All I have to do is say, I was in fear, prove I wasn't.
Yeah.
Very difficult to argue what's in my head, right? And because I'm a police officer and I'm the authority, great deference is given to what I say, and juries want to believe what I say. And so quite naturally, if that's understood, and if you see police chiefs, your supervisors supporting the bullshit, if I can say it like that, everybody's grown in here, right? When you see them supporting that, then why would you want to do anything different?
So it's not necessarily the safety that an officer is worried about their own safety, and it's not also, you didn't mention that, and you also didn't mention maybe the training that is involved, it being an inconvenience. It's not those things, it's more just kind of the scrutiny and the...
It's the lack of accountability.
Yeah.
It's the lack of accountability.
Well, don't you think that the accountability that's built into 392, you can be fired if you don't play the game right, the way the law says you're supposed to, if it will be enforced.
And so then the other thing that you guys need to do is you guys need to get on juries, right? I don't know if there's any subpoena dodgers in here, but yeah, you need to get on juries and be a part of that process, because there's not one thing that's going to fix this.
And if I can just add to that too about what legislators are saying about, a lot of legislators are basically repeating and parroting what the police lobby is telling them in the Capitol. And so that's what we have to dispel. Like, we have to dispel the myth that, that officers are going to be put in danger if this bill passes. That's simply not the case, and the data does not say that.
Is there a list that we can get somewhere that shows what police unions and that gave to which senators and assemblymen?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I'll just say too, to this point, a lot of legislators are also saying that this bill is going to harm the culture of police departments. That in Seattle, the morale is so low in the Seattle Police Department that officers don't want to get out of their car. That officers they don't want to follow people down a dark alley. But I think our job as constituents is to tell our legislators, I'm sorry, but what is more valued, morale or human lives? And also, Obama's 21st Century Task Force on Policing, they found that when community and police trust increases, morale increases within departments. And so this is, to Cheryl's point, the evasive, nature that the officers and the police lobby, they do not want to be held accountable to this standard. But I think we know that the standard is going to work, and the morale question is just not acceptable.
And when you hear that kind of nonsense, if you have an opportunity to ask a police chief a question, a follow-up question, when they say something like morale is going to be lower, then that's somebody we don't want on the job, right? Really. Because listen, everybody wants to go to work and like what you do. We all have rules and regulations that we have to follow in whatever occupation you're in. And so if you went to work and they said that today we're using blue pens, and you just don't want to use a blue pen because you like black, are you not going to do your job? If they're passing out blue pens and this is all you can use, are you going to refuse to do your job? Probably not. And so police officers don't get to do that. And any officer who says, I'm not going to get out of my car because I don't want somebody recording me should not be on the job, because that means you're probably doing something that's untoward, and we don't want you.
Cheryl?
Sure. So, I think that a lot of people are here because they want to know what they can do. So we have an action, and that's great. But I just wanted to talk about an organization called the Invisible Institute in Chicago. They released a report last week, and the report says that there have been over almost 23,000 investigations of officers using excessive force, 3,000 allegations of rape by officers, child molestation, and other egregious forms of misconduct. What's so interesting to me is that this was reported in USA Today nationally. This organization is now putting out the names of the officers. So, for those of you that are really interested in taking action, the ACLU Pasadena Foothills Chapter has a police practices committee, and Kris heads that up, and it's extremely effective, and we always need help. But I urge you to do a Google search for this Invisible Institute and find out how they were able to accomplish what they did.
James?
Is there any language that would affect the post size for the officer? So in effect, if you're working banking, you can have financial crime, you can't work in banking. If they violate AB 392, is there something that would force the officer or make the officers lose their post certification, thus ending their career in law enforcement?
That's a good question. So 392 does not certify officers. It's important to note too that California is one of the last states that doesn't allow officers to be decertified, and so that's actually why we see so many officers in California move from department to department. 392, as Cheryl mentioned, is one step in the right direction. I think if we consider the most powerful entity in our state, one of them has to be the power of the police unions and the police association, the statewide associations, the local associations. And so decertification is not addressed in this bill, but it is an important thing to continue working on.
And also, I'm going to go over here for the next one. I'd just like to say that we did pass, as you suggested, 1421, the ability for the citizenry to see the records of police who have been judged for misconduct. And there's further things that we can do with that. So I think we're on the right path. And if we can win this will be a major win. And then you go along to these further fights like decertification. Wouldn't you imagine ACLU will go for that at some point?
So, I think you make a really important point that, in the past years, there's been multiple laws passed that focus on transparency, like the past AB 953, which now makes it mandatory that police departments report all racial and identity data of all the people that they're stopping or interacting with. And so that's a way for us to track which departments are engaging in racial profiling. That law is just basically going to affect this year. Last year, we just passed the transparency bill. Again, to your point, the bill that, now makes it available to the public records of police misconduct and deadly force. This is the first year where we're getting closer and closer to passing this bill that's going to change statewide policy. And we know it's going to have a big impact on decreasing and intervening in the rate of deadly force in our state. And so I think to your point, we're on a pattern. We're moving forward, but we're still up against huge obstacles. And so, I think that's really concerned about.
Yeah. Caroline?
I wanted to comment on your question about holding the sheriff accountable. I know that there have been town halls that the county has been setting up to talk about the sheriff. One happened in Carson, I know, recently, maybe 2 weeks ago. This past week in Malibu, another one is happening this week, and I don't know where. But what I would like to do is look up that schedule and send it to you. Kris, is there some way that you can get it to people? Email it or post it somewhere so that people know where
Well,
they
they
can.
can address it LA Progressive will post it. LA Progressive.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay. And
I got the email, so that's from me.
good. I'll get it to you, Shannon.
Okay.
I have two questions. One has to do with Hamid Khan from Stop LAPD Spying. You know who he is? Well, in any case, he said he's opposed to 392. I was totally shocked when he said that. He's yes.
This is Northwest Pasadena, and we have LA.
And the gentleman that's in charge of Stop LAPD Spying told me that he's opposed to this bill because he said it's a waste of time and energy. Police will always say that it is necessary. So he's saying that he doesn't think that it's going to make a difference. And I want to know what you think of that. That's number one. And number two, there's a competing bill, apparently,
Oh, yes.
SB 230, and I wanted to know what you thought of those. So those are my two questions.
Sure. So I think with 392, I mean, it's clear that the areas in which this necessary standard has been implemented, it has a huge impact. Again, Seattle, Cleveland are some examples that we like to point to that show the decrease in use of force. And so I think you're right in some sense that, departments, there's a lot to change within our police departments. And one statewide law is going to make a huge impact, but, to the points that we were making earlier, it's not the end-all be-all. And so I think this bill is a really important step forward, and we know that it is going to intervene in the rate of deadly force just from the data behind it. And so, again, ACLU is our number one priority because we know that this is an important effort. Some of the organizations that make up our coalition working on this include two statewide coalitions led by impacted family members. And so a lot of the coalition we take direction from, and a lot of leadership from those families who are impacted. Some of the other organizations include United Domestic Workers, California Faculty Association, Youth Justice Coalition, Black Lives Matter.
League of Women Voters.
League of Women Voters. Yes, so, yeah, absolutely. And so I think, it's important, I think, to be critical, but I think we also have to recognize that, that these policies are steps in the right direction. And so, organizing work has to encompass all of this. It has to encompass statewide legislation, grassroots organizing, organizing work led by impacted families. And so this is, in our view, one step in the right direction to the world that we want to see. So we're behind this bill. And with the competing bill, that's an important question.
SB 230, everybody should tell their legislators to oppose this.
That's right. So SB 230, I'll just take this opportunity now to also say how many wins that we've had in this campaign thus far. So we've passed SB 392, our bill, in one committee so far.
You should tell them what SB 230 is.
Yes. And so the second one that we had was basically overcoming SB 230. SB 230 was a bill that was introduced by the statewide law enforcement associations that Cheryl mentioned. It was written by them. It was authored by Senator Caballero from Salinas. And they introduced this to directly undermine Dr. Weber's bill, right? So there was a campaign to have our senators oppose this bill. ACLU is still in opposition to this bill. But what's really important to note is that on April 23rd, the Senate Public Safety Committee basically stripped their bill of all competing language to AB 392. Yeah. And so that took like 200 people, 300 people mobilizing to the state capitol on April 9th and on April 23rd. And that, the power that is behind this bill, I think, goes to show that, I think that was a huge win for us. And so at this point, what's also important to know about what we call the COPS bill, it's now tied to Dr. Weber's bill in that their bill will only pass if AB 392 passes. Not the other way around, but SB 230 will only pass if AB 392 passes. And so now their bill is only a training bill. There's no funding associated to it or tied to it. But the Senate Public Safety agreed that Dr. Weber's policy is the only way forward, and that they appeased the cop lobby to just remain it, basically have it remain a training bill.
Yeah, wasn't that the case? It was only offering training, there wasn't any specific guidelines, no requirements, no real consequences. Just let's train some more.
Yep, and I mean, so the bill as it was, so now this is not the case, but the cops bill previously basically was trying to implement a statewide policy change that, mentioned buzzwords like de-escalation and like sanctity of life, but there was no sort of measurement to de-escalate. And so technically a department could put in their policy, officers never have to de-escalate, and it would be lawful. And so that's why folks, as soon as we all the statewide coalition put out the call to oppose this bill, that's, why we were successful on the 23rd. So at this point, AB 392 is the only focus of the coalition. We're trying to power through and make sure that we pass the assembly.
The fast of getting bills to hold officers accountable and basically stop the murders on our streets. But I've heard you talk before in other forums and then tonight about the culture that if you don't comply fast enough, if you don't do things fast enough, and then I feel like that's the long game in changing that mentality, whether it's that, the roid rage, because I would agree with the lady who mentioned that. I had a friend in health food supplies who he made a lot of money off of police officers doing steroids, right? And so I guess my question to you is, are there more of you? More of you, we get more of you. And how do you change, I'm going to go out on a limb, how do you change a really violent, masculine, violent culture if you don't take out the violent masculinity?
Well, I think part of it is, I think they need more girls, right?
Yeah.
They need more women because they just deal with things differently. And, unfortunately, I'm sad to say, but I don't really see it changing in my lifetime. It's so deep-rooted, it's systemic, it's cultural. And listen, the fish rots from the head down. Every police chief was once a police officer, right? On my department, Michael Moore, he talks a good game, but listen, I knew Michael Moore when he was a sergeant. And I knew the kind of shenanigans that he was involved in when he was a police officer. And so, he says all the right stuff in front of the cameras, but at the end of the day, his responsibility, I feel, I'm not in his head, but this is what I feel, is to that organism, is to the entity, is to the LAPD. And if every now and again an officer benefits because they shelter and they circle the wagons and they minimize and they mitigate that bad behavior, okay, so the officer benefits. But it's really all about that organism. It's about protecting that department. And so until you change that, and it's going to take some time because you've got to get the right people on the job. That means recruitment. I don't know what recruitment looks like on the LAPD anymore, but you've got to get people in the feeder pool position of police officers who will ultimately become supervisors and command staff officers who are making policy. And then you have to, I think LAPD, and I'm not biased because I was there, but I think we do a pretty good job in terms of managing our officers for the most part. Most of the police officers are there for the right thing and they're doing the right thing. Be clear. But I think unless and until there's got to be accountability, and you got to start changing the dynamic. And if you have a situation where it's not taught to be uber aggressive, but understand this, as a rookie officer, you're not vested. And your training officer, you're like a child, and he holds your life in his hands. And you want to be pleasing, and if pleasing means aggressive, and if pleasing means abusive and profane to people, because police officers don't start off killing you, they start off talking to you crazy at a traffic stop, right?
Yeah.
They start off being nasty with you when they come to your house for a neighbor dispute, right? And so if nothing is done at that level, and if you're a young officer and you're impressionable and you want to please your training officer because he's going to write your rating at the end of the month and you want to get off probation, which is 18 months, then you learn real quick what to do, right? And then it's not until you get off probation Frankenstein's monster now. What did they create? What are you? Are you that same Uber officer that it replicates? And so if you don't have a cool head, and I like to think that was my role as a training officer and as a supervisor, that's what happens when officers catch you, they want to punish you, right? So you need a cooler head, you need a supervisor who's going to be responsible and willing to make that tough decision and say, hey, that's enough. That's enough. He's in custody now. But that needs to be encouraged. And police chiefs do not create an environment where it's conducive for officers sometimes to be that voice. Because listen, there's no such thing as whistleblower protection. Know that. Know that. There's no safe place for police officers to go and report misconduct. Because what will happen is you'll be ostracized, you'll be dealt with, you may not get back up as quickly as you need it. And I know this to be report misconduct. Is there a safe place they can go and not get retribution, not get what we call freeway therapy, which is where they know you live one place and have you working in another, or they put you on a god-awful detail because, well, deployment needs dictate that, and that's just what they say. Because how do you argue that, right? You can't argue that. So there's no incentive for officers to even stop the bad behavior. And so, like I said, there's so many different tentacles and so many different things that are going to require action, and you guys should be demanding that of your police chiefs and your sheriffs. Ask them these questions when you see them and find out what they say and hold your feet to the fire. Because listen, police chiefs have tremendous autonomy and they get to do what they want. And even on LAPD, we have an independent civilian review board, but at the end of the day, if they don't like what the chief does, he's like, thank you. I appreciate your suggestion and input. But then he goes back to his office and he does what he wants. And so it's incumbent upon you guys to put that kind of pressure on them to do something different.
Hi, we got a question from Facebook. It actually works, right? So Joyce Perry has asked, has anyone seen the Pasadena Police Department union contract with the city? Has it ever been requested?
No, good question.
Is there an organization that should be requesting it on our behalf? Is this public information?
It should be public information. I know ACLU, we have pulled the contracts for other departments in the past. I'm not sure if we have Pasadena, but they are public. Usually you can find them, like we found some departments in Orange County just off the internet.
Okay.
With the search. But it should be public information because it is a public contract between our city and the association. And so it should also be something that anyone can request from their public records process.
And I know that I think it's Black Lives Matter who do Campaign Zero, aren't they? And they've done a fine job of a lot of research, and one of their research projects was looking at union contracts with various cities in the United States, and how to sort of pull them apart and stuff like that. So we might want to do that. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's okay, I'll get back to it.
You.
Yes. So I have a two-part question. One of them, if and when the bill is passed, when will it be implemented as far as the time frame? And secondly, as far as training and budget-wise with officers, if it is implemented, if it does pass, how does that work out? Do they go off-grid as far as off the streets to do training? How does that work?
Well, I don't know specifically, but I mean, I just generally, LAPD, and I'm sure everybody kind of works the same way, there's constantly in-service training.
Okay.
And so this would be something that can be, for the training aspect, the 230 training bill that the unions are putting forth, I would imagine would just get in the rotation for the things that officers are trained yearly and get the force trained that way.
Right. Okay.
And the bill, if it does pass, I should say when it does pass, given all the momentum behind this, it would likely be implemented on January 1st of the following year. And so that might be, on our timeline, 2020, January 1st.
Yeah, I really got Jennifer cited a half a dozen police forces in California that are among the most deadly. So first, where does LA County's police department or LAPD stand in that? And then is there something about the way police departments are organized out here, or is there more crime, or is it just us Californians? Why is that so, that so many of our Stockton and San Bernardino are so such deadly police forces?
Yeah, that's a good question. So LA has some of the highest numbers of police, of officer-involved shootings and deadly use of force. Per capita, I can't say where it falls, but I do know from Youth Justice Coalition, their data has found that, LA County has some of the highest numbers. And, it's interesting that you ask, like, why is it these certain cities? A lot of times, at least with our research in places like Anaheim, that also had some of the highest rates of deadly force, it has nothing to do with public safety or like the rate of crime. Oftentimes, I can't say that I don't have the data behind every single city, but in Anaheim, for example, if I can speak on that, there were 2 years, like in 2012 and I believe 2006, where APD was responsible for like 75% of all the homicides in the city. Yeah, yes.
Can you repeat that?
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2 years, just 2 years, Anaheim Police Department was responsible for 75% of 3/4 of all homicides in the entire city. And so it's, and I think, so again, I don't have the data behind some of these cities that have very high rates of deadly force, but I will say in the cities that we have looked at closely, it has nothing to do with crime rates. And so I think that's an important point that, it's just unacceptable, this rate of deadly force.
Just to add to that, The Guardian was doing their own project called The Counted, and it looked specifically at Kern County Sheriffs and as well as LAPD. So if you go onto the Guardian website and follow their project, The Counted, it'll give you better insight into individual cases as well as sort of common practice of those departments.
Yeah, I actually read the 21st century review on policing, cover to cover. And the point that they made is that it is the culture that starts, as you said, fish sticks at the head first. It starts from the top down. The culture that the chief embodies is passed through with the rest of the officers. So that's why you have departments that are more egregious than other departments, because it's the person that's generally running them, and he develops the culture. Now, I've got a question, and it's a clarification question. We talk about police unions all the time, and my understanding is they're not unions in the sense of, you're going to get together and you go to strike, but they're literally lobbying arms, much like the NRA. And like the NRA, they don't really want to see any legislation at all that would impede the police force. And so my assumption is correct, that they're lobbying arms and not unions in the sense of a union like striking coal miners.
Yeah, they call them unions, but they're not really that. And my experience and my belief is based on what you see the representatives say whenever there's an opportunity to speak on a deadly police shooting. They don't see one that they don't like. Certainly in New York, that Police Benevolent Officers Association, they get excited about every kind of use of force. Right now, they're representing, there's a hearing going on right now for Daniel Pantaleo, the officer who killed Eric Garner. And they've even had their surgeon, the NYPD chief surgeon came out and said that Eric Garner died because he was obese. It had nothing to do with the chokehold. And so you understand, if you have the chief surgeon and the Police Benevolent Officers Association speaking the same speak, and this officer has been on desk duty since 2014 when he choked Eric Garner to death. I don't think that they're going to take his job. The jury's already declined to indict him, so nothing substantively is going to happen in that instance. And so listen, officers are watching. They're watching what's going on. I'm encouraged by the few that have been convicted and are doing a little bit of jail time. Roy Oliver in Texas, who shot and killed 15-year-old Jordan Edwards, and Jason Van Dyke, he only got 6 years for Laquan McDonald. You have Norman Rojas in Florida, who recently was convicted and got 20 years for shooting a young man by the name of Corey Jones. And so I think as more of those start to happen, maybe you'll give officers a reason to pause before they use deadly force. But I think, really and truthfully, I know we get tunnel vision when we're in the midst of something. You know, police officers get tunnel vision, and that's why so many people see them wearing a camera, telling you it's being recorded as they do something that violates policy, because they just get locked in. And so, because of that, I think there are some who just are going to continue to do what they do. They're drunk with power, they're caught up in the moment, and then there's no substantive consequence to deter the bad behavior. So they do it again because they are given license to do it again.
It's called moral hazard.
Yeah, so unless until accountability is everything. To me, it's everything. And that needs to, at some point, somebody needs to focus in on holding officers personally accountable.
Okay, one last, and then we'd like to talk about what we can do about this.
Yes.
So I sort of have here a few different pieces to my question, but Cheryl, you mentioned that we should be careful to always accept our jury summons. So I understood in the Kris case that there was it wasn't possible to bring a criminal suit against these two officers, that there could only be a civil suit because the criminal aspect of it was being investigated interdepartmentally. Did I have that wrong? And if that's true, why can Pasadena do that, but this guy in Florida's police officer got 20 years? Am I making sense here?
Yeah, I think it has to do with, what an agency is willing to do in terms of discipline. Right?
Oh, so truly, it's like the fox is in the hen house.
Police chiefs have tremendous autonomy. They get to do what they want. And listen, there was a situation, there's been a couple of things recently. I don't know if you heard about the guy who shot into the pickup truck with the children. He was looking for a robbery suspect, and he said he found this guy, but he didn't say that this guy was a robbery suspect, and he shot into the car, shot 3 children, one in the head, died. You have another officer who was engaged in some foolishness with some students. They were leaving school, and one of the kids said, "F the police," and so the officer says something. Thankfully no one was hurt, but he says, "Wait till your ass turns 18, I'm coming for you." And so they made a complaint to the police department, and the police department's response was, "We're going to take appropriate action." The mayor says, "I'm trusting the police chief to do the right thing." And so what ultimately happened is that the officer was disciplined. He was disciplined. He got a reprimand. If you have an officer who's telling little black kids that, "I can't wait till you get 18 so I can come and get you," that's kind of a red flag for me. Maybe this isn't the job for him, but the police chief had the autonomy to do that. He could give this guy a reprimand, and so this guy lives to offend again. We'll have to wait on that police department for him to kill somebody before someone is going to get outraged, and maybe something will happen. Okay, Jay.
One final thought, just a point of clarification. Per Pasadena charter, the police chief does not serve at the pleasure of the mayor. He serves at the sole discretion of the city manager. So, in the case of the Christopher Ballou case, just real quickly, it was almost 4 weeks exactly after the event that the bystander video surfaced. So as soon as that incident happened, as Sergeant Dorsey would probably confirm, it triggered an internal review, use of force review. So there were at least 4 supervisors, 3 or 4 supervisors who saw that incident and did absolutely nothing.
Until it surfaced.
Until it surfaced. By then, Esparza had been vested and had full protection because he was still on probation. So Sanchez could have fired him immediately without question, without any other issue. So I would encourage, again, that call to action is email our city manager, Steve Mermel, and ask him what is he going to do with respect to Officer Lujan and Officer Esparza.
Please, everybody do that.
And it's only up to us, nobody else. The politicians aren't going to do it. The judges or the courts aren't going to do it.